You have gone through all the sales process. You have made contact with the customer, you have scheduled a visit, you have understood by asking the STEAM questions. So you have understood the situation, the problem, the implication, and the needs. You could understand what the customer values, and then you were able to elaborate a very nice value proposition and have presented it to the customer. After your presentation, the customer says, "Oh, yes, it's all really beautiful, but," and always after that but comes something that will prevent the conversation to move on, also known as objection. The question is objection something good or bad? The answer, quite obvious, it depends. An objection is not necessarily good or bad. It is a signal that the customer wants to go on, but something is preventing him to go. And how can we handle an objection? The first thing we need to do is to identify if the objection is about a real problem or if it is a perception. For some reason, the customer got a perception that, for instance, our solution is too expensive. So we need to understand the reason for that word expensive to come out of his mouth. What concern is behind that word? Let's see how to deal with objections in both cases. First, if it is a real problem, the only thing you can do is to negotiate. Remember, when going on in the sales conversation, you have to find out what are the shared interests, the common ground. What are the differing interests, something that is not yours or the customer's priority interest, but can represent complementary interest? And what is the opposed interest? What means more for one and less for the other? What we need to do during our negotiation is to reduce the opposed interest slice and enlarge the differing and shared interest slices. How do we do this? Number one, focusing on the problem and not on the person. Number two, emphasize the things that converge the mutual interests. Number three, develop objective criteria with the customer. Number four, think about creative options to make the problem smaller than the solution. So far, you have seen how to deal with the objection. It is a real problem. How to deal with it then if it is a perception? First thing to do, listen to the customer without interrupting him. After he verbalizes what concerns him, makes a 3 to 5 second pause so you can process what is behind that concern. Then you need to acknowledge that the customer has a legitimate concern, making the customer feel that it's all right to feel that way. But pay attention here, there's a tricky here. To acknowledge is different than saying you are right, because if he's right, it means you're wrong. Don't fall into that trap. What I usually say is, you see, if I were on your shoes, I would probably be thinking the same thing. And then I take the chance to isolate that objection by asking, besides this, is there anything else that concerns you and prevent us to move on? If he says something else, I go through the same process. I'll listen to him without interrupting, and then I will acknowledge that is a legitimate concern. And then I will ask again if there is something else that concerns him. And when he finally says, no, there's nothing else, then I'll go back to the first objection and change his concern into a question. Now, what's the reason for doing this? If you respond directly to the objection, deconstructing what the customer designed in his mind, his limbic brain will interpret it as an attack. And then he will raise the defensive barriers and will no longer listen to you. The idea that will come to his mind is, he wants to push me, he wants to sock his solution under my throat. And it will be game over. Then, what do we need to do? Change it into a question. Let's suppose the customer says, oh, it's too expensive. I'll listen without interrupting. Acknowledge by saying, probably, if I were in your shoes, I would say the same. And then ask, besides this, is anything else that concerns you? If the answer is no, I ask him, so what do you mean is that you are concerned that the amount you're paying does not correspond to the benefits you're going to receive. Is that correct? And then I calmly respond to the question, reaffirming the benefits and building the value of my solution. When I finish, I ask the customer, is there anything else that you need to be convinced that this is the best solution for you? If the answer is no, we are ready to move on in the sales conversation.